The message from my wife arrived at 9:47 p.m. Don't wait up. I'm staying at Daniel and Claire's place tonight. They're celebrating their anniversary, and Claire asked me to help with something. I remember staring at those words longer than I should have. Nothing about the message sounded suspicious, yet something inside me refused to settle. My wife, Emily, had known Daniel and Claire for years, and I trusted all three of them. At least I thought I did. I told myself I was being paranoid and went back to watching television. But at 11:32 p.m., I received another message from Emily. It contained only 3 words. Please trust me. That was when the uneasy feeling in my stomach became impossible to ignore. Why would she send that unless there was something she was afraid I might discover? I tried calling her once. She didn't answer. I called again 20 minutes later, and this time the phone rang until voicemail. I almost laughed at myself. Maybe she was helping Claire in the kitchen. Maybe everyone had been drinking and celebrating. Maybe Daniel had asked her to stay because Claire wasn't feeling well. There were dozens of innocent explanations, and I wanted desperately to believe one of them. Emily and I had been married for 11 years. We had survived job losses, family problems, financial pressure, and exhausting years when everything seemed to happen at once. I knew her habits, her favorite coffee, the way she laughed when she was nervous, and a little expression she made when she was hiding a surprise. But that night, I realized something terrifying. Knowing someone's routines doesn't necessarily mean knowing their secrets. At 1:06 a.m., I finally decided to drive to Daniel's house. The neighborhood was unusually quiet when I arrived. Most of the houses were dark, and the streetlights reflected against the wet pavement from an earlier rain. I parked half a block away because I suddenly felt embarrassed about what I was doing. I wasn't a detective. I wasn't supposed to be checking on my wife. I was supposed to trust her. Still, something pulled me toward the house. When I reached Daniel's driveway, I noticed Emily's car parked behind his. My heart began beating faster. I looked to the front window and saw the living room decorated with anniversary balloons, flowers, and empty glasses. It looked exactly like a celebration had taken place. But there was one problem. The house was completely silent. No music, no voices, no laughter. I knocked once. Nobody answered. I knocked again. Still nothing. Then I noticed the back door wasn't completely closed. I stepped inside and immediately called out, "Daniel? Claire." Silence answered me. The living room looked abandoned, but there were signs that people had been there recently. Plates sat on the dining table. A half-eaten cake rested beside 2 champagne glasses. Several photographs were scattered near the fireplace. I walked farther inside, calling Emily's name under my breath. Then I heard something upstairs. A faint movement. A floorboard creaked. I froze. Every instinct told me to leave, but another part of me needed an answer. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step making the silence feel heavier. At the end of the hallway was the guest bedroom. The door was slightly open. Light spilled through the gap. I reached for the handle, my hand shaking. I remember thinking that whatever was behind that door would change my life. I just didn't understand how completely. I pushed the door open. Emily was standing beside the bed. Daniel was there too. For a second, neither of them moved. My entire body went cold. The scene looked exactly like the nightmare I had spent the previous hour trying to convince myself wasn't real. Emily's jacket was on the chair. Daniel looked pale. Emily stared at me as though she'd seen a ghost. "Mark," she whispered. I couldn't speak. My eyes moved around the room, searching for something that could explain what I was seeing. Then Daniel suddenly stepped forward. "It's not what you think." Those words made everything worse. People don't say that when everything is normal. Emily began crying. "Please, just let me explain." I finally found my voice. "Explain what?" Neither answered, and in that terrible silence, I felt 11 years of trust collapse inside me. Turned toward the door. I didn't want to hear excuses. I didn't want to hear lies dressed up as explanations. But before I could leave, Emily said something that stopped me. "Mark, Daniel is not the reason I asked you to trust me." I looked back at her. "Then what is—" She pointed toward the desk. There was a thick envelope lying beside a laptop. My name was written across it in Emily's handwriting. I stared at it without touching it. Daniel looked uncomfortable. Emily wiped her tears and said, "Open it." I picked it up. Inside were printed bank statements, photographs, copies of emails, and several documents with my name on them. At first, I couldn't understand what I was looking at. Then I saw the dates. Some were from months earlier. Some were from years ago. My anger suddenly became mixed with confusion. "What is this?" I asked. Emily took a deep breath. "I found out that someone's been using your identity." I stared at her. "What?" She explained that several weeks earlier, she had noticed strange financial activity connected to an old account. She initially thought it was a banking mistake. Then she discovered that someone had been opening accounts and making transactions using information connected to me. She had secretly started investigating because she was afraid that confronting me too early would alert whoever was behind it. Daniel worked in financial compliance, and she had asked him for help because he had experience tracing suspicious transactions. The anniversary gathering had been real, but after Claire went to bed, Emily and Daniel continued reviewing the documents upstairs. She had sent me, "Please trust me," because she knew she was keeping something from me, but she hadn't known how to explain it over the phone. I didn't know whether to believe her. The explanation sounded possible, but the image I had walked into had already poisoned my thoughts. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. Emily looked down. "Because I was scared." Daniel finally spoke. "And because the person doing this may have access to information inside your company." That sentence changed the room. We spent the next hour going through everything. One document showed a loan application, submitted using my details. Another contained an unfamiliar signature that looked frighteningly similar to mine. Then Emily showed me a series of emails. The sender had been communicating with someone who appeared to know private details about our family. Details that shouldn't have been available to a stranger. My fears slowly shifted from my marriage to something much larger. Someone had been watching us. At 3:18 a.m., Daniel noticed something none of us had seen before. One of the emails contained a photograph of a document that had been taken inside our house. The background showed our kitchen. I immediately remembered that photograph. It had been taken months earlier during a family gathering. Suddenly, the mystery became personal. Whoever was behind this wasn't simply stealing information online. They had access to our lives. Emily looked at me and said, "That's why I couldn't tell you everything." I asked her the question that had been destroying me since I opened the bedroom door. "Did you ever betray me?" Her eyes filled with tears. "No, but I understand why you thought I did." That answer hurt more than a simple denial would have. She wasn't angry at me. She knew exactly what that moment had looked like. The next morning, Claire confirmed that the anniversary celebration had ended hours earlier. She had gone to bed because she assumed Emily and Daniel were finishing some paperwork. The entire situation had been innocent, but the damage between Emily and me was not. On the drive home, neither of us spoke. I kept replaying the bedroom scene in my mind. Even after learning the truth, I couldn't simply erase what I had felt. Emily eventually whispered, "I know you don't trust me right now." I looked out the window. "I want to," I said, "but trust doesn't come back because someone explains what happened." She nodded quietly. For the first time in years, we were sitting beside each other without pretending everything was fine. The truth had saved our marriage from one misunderstanding, but it also exposed how fragile our communication had become. Over the following weeks, we worked together to uncover who had accessed my information. Eventually, the investigation pointed towards someone connected to a former business relationship of mine. He had access to old records and had been using stolen information for months. The authorities became involved, and the financial accounts were secured. The person responsible was eventually identified, and the mystery that had haunted us finally had an answer. But solving the external problem didn't automatically repair the internal one. Emily and I began talking honestly about things we'd avoided for years. She admitted that she had become afraid of telling me difficult things because she expected me to react badly. I admitted that I had become so comfortable with our marriage that I confused familiarity with understanding. We both realized that the night I opened that bedroom door wasn't the night our marriage almost ended. It was the night we finally realized we had stopped communicating. Months later, Emily and I returned to Daniel and Claire's house for another anniversary dinner. The same room that had once been filled with suspicion was now filled with laughter. Before dinner, Emily quietly took my hand. "Do you still remember that night?" she asked. I smiled sadly. I don't think I'll ever forget it. She looked at me, waiting for my answer. But I remember something else, too. I told her. I remember that I almost walked away before hearing the truth. She squeezed my hand. Our marriage wasn't magically perfect. Trust had to be rebuilt through hundreds of ordinary moments, honest conversations, open phones when either of us felt uneasy, keeping promises and refusing to let fear fill in the blanks. I learned that betrayal isn't always an affair, and suspicion isn't always proof. Sometimes the most dangerous thing in a marriage is the story we create before we know the truth. A year after that night, Emily gave me a small envelope on our anniversary. Inside was a photograph of us from our first year of marriage. On the back, she had written, "Trust isn't believing that nothing bad will ever happen. Trust is believing that when something does happen, we'll face the truth together." I read it twice. Then I looked at the woman beside me and realized how different I felt from the man who had opened that bedroom door. Back then, I thought my marriage was being destroyed by another person. Now I understood that fear, silence, assumptions, and unspoken problems could be just as destructive. The bedroom door had revealed something I never expected. Not an affair, but a hidden crisis and a deeper problem in our marriage. We survived because we chose to investigate the truth instead of surrendering to the first story our minds created. And that decision changed our marriage forever.